But hello, my name is Dr. Erica Brown, and I'm here from Epic Education. And I just want to kind of introduce us to our virtual meeting norms because as we're moving through the space, it's just helpful in order to be able to truly focus in and pay attention to all the voices that are in the space and making room for those voices. So we have these set of virtual meeting norms. So what I'm asking is that you keep your device muted when not speaking. And feel free to type your questions into the chat. I always, and Rosina knows this, I always think I'm an awesome multitasker. Is that even a word? After 22 years of teaching K through 12. But I noticed that I let things drop through the cracks. So if I miss something, if you drop something in the chat and I don't respond to it, remember your voice is valuable. And so the invitation is always to come off a mute and share into the space because that's how we learn. And then specifically when we're in breakout rooms, the request is that, or the invitation is that you enable your camera for deepened group connection. So with that, like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. Again, my name is Dr. Erica Brown. Rosina, you wanna introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rosina Kapadia. I'm co-facilitating. I am actually going to be handling the chat, so you'll get to meet me. I'm also a former teacher. I taught special education for many years of my life, and then I was an administrator, coordinator and director of special education. So equity is my passion, and I just really love presenting with Dr. Brown, so I just came because I'm a fan. So.
Thank you.
All right.
So just in terms of our group agreements, as we're moving through the space, like I said, your voice is valued. And so this is a set of group agreements for us. The first is to meet speakers where they are. And specifically when we're talking about this topic in terms of weaponizing of wokeness, my puppy's crying in the background, she never does that. In terms of weaponizing wokeness, this idea that we're on this equity journey, right? Some of us have just stepped onto the path and some of us have been on that path for a while. But our goal is to learn from one another and to grow as a collective. And in order to do that, I need to recognize where folks are and not project where I wish they were and use that against them, but to co-create a space where we can learn from one another. Also making room for different perspectives. We have different lived experiences and it shapes the way we view the world. And just making space to hear people's personal truths as they move through this virtual space. I'm asking that you respect confidentiality because as, like I always say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And so part of us being able to dig into this work is to be able to be our true authentic self and be vulnerable and transparent. Approach with a growth mindset because we are all lifelong learners, and then engage and participate, whatever that looks like for you.
And then I just want to, on a side note, it's if you're the respect confidentiality, yes, we are recording. So we do want to say that this part, but when you're in your group breakout groups, we will not be recording. So that's where we really want that vulnerability. So I just want to clarify.
Rosina, do you want to walk us through the objectives?
Sure. So as educators and just people who like to learn, we want to know why we're here. And so here are our objectives for today. So we want to be able to define and assess yourself in the term of positionality on wokeness scale. So we're going to talk a little bit about the definition, and then we're going to go into where we fall on the scale and going backwards and forwards along the scale as well. We're also going to examine the way wokeness may be I'm not going to be able to say this word now, so I said it wrong. Just say it for me.
Subvert it.
There you go. And weaponize. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how when people use the term wokeness, whether it's positive or negative, what it really means and how it can actually be used against people. And then we're actually going to inlay the RIR protocol over this. So look at the interpersonal aspects of weaponization in order to move from the fixed to the growth mindset. And so what we really want to do is utilize our protocol to refer to as we move through this entire session. So we're going to ask you to recognize through some steps. We're going to ask ourselves to interrupt. A lot of this is a self-assessment and a self-evaluation and self-reflection, which is something that EPIC prides itself on. And so as we do the steps of the protocol, I really encourage you all to step outside your comfort zones and to be vulnerable and to recognize where you are and just the steps that we need to take to all be better equity warriors for ourselves and for others. All right, and then speaking of the protocol, here are the steps of our protocol. So the first step is to recognize, and this is just ourselves. So this is our self-assessment. So how does this make me feel? What happens in my body? And what does this make me think? And as we talk about wokeness, we might hear terms that we're like, oh my God, that's not something I would do. Or you might feel personally like it's personalized. We really want you to identify with that feeling, because once you recognize and once you're able to identify what happens in your body and what you're thinking, it's going to be able to support you in how you interrupt. Okay. And with interrupt, it can go multiple ways. And I always tell people you have like the left fork and the right fork of the interruption. And maybe in our younger years, I know in my 20s, I always took the left fork, which was maybe a little profanity laced and maybe a little aggressive when I interrupted. But now I'm grown, I'm calmer. And so now I tend to take the right fork, not always, but I tend to mostly take the right fork. And this is the part where we reflect. What questions can I ask? How can I learn more? How can I discover intent? And that's important for us, but it also requires us to do a little bit of active listening, right? It requires us to really use our group agreements to say, I don't know this experience or this perspective, so I'm going to need to ask more questions, okay? And then also sharing the impact that it's having on you, right? And so this is a really important step, but prior to this, we do need to recognize where we're coming from to ensure we can interrupt correctly. And then the final step is repair. So how do I stay connected and in a relationship with myself and others? This actually for me is probably the most important step. I used to say it used to be the interrupt, but now I actually believe that the repair is. And the reason for that is it's continued conversation, right? We live in a culture right now where we do a lot of cancel culture. We unfriend, we don't talk to people if they don't believe our same values. And that's really not teaching students and other people that that's a good way to connect. And so we really want to talk about, yes, we don't agree. Yes, we have different perspectives, but how can we continue to stay connected and engage in conversation? And so we're really going to talk a little bit more about that as we dive into wokeness. Okay.
Can I get one of the participants to come off of mute to read this quote out loud?
Sure. I have seen great intolerance shown in support of tolerance. By Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Thank you so much. And so for the beginning of this webinar, we're going to really live in the recognize it phase. So with this quote, and if you need to read it over again to yourself, I really want you to kind of hone in on it and recognize how the quote makes you feel. And then also think about what does it make you think, right? So just kind of take a personal stock of that quote and how it resonates with you. So I'll give folks just a minute to reread that to themselves. So I always feel like as we start these trainings and we provide a quote, and I'm going to be honest, Rosina and I, as we go through and we build some of the trainings that we do as part of EPIC, really kind of hone in on those quotes that are going to set the tone, right? Lay the foundation for the conversation that we'll engage in today. And so just kind of noodling over how this quote is gonna reflect some of the conversations that we hope to invite folks to join us in. So just take one more minute. Okay, thank you. Rosina, you wanna go ahead and move us forward? So this is kind of a, am I taking this one, Rosina? I should have asked, I apologize.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So as we're looking at this is kind of a visual representation, and it's based on an article on this idea of wokeness. So before we even really kind of define what wokeness is, looking at this as a kind of a linear representation of wokeness, starting with asleep, then groggy, then thinking about the next step as being eyes wide open, then being woke as heck, and then being an insomniac. So what I'm asking folks to take a moment to do is to reflect on the different phases or stages in this continuum of wokeness or scale of wokeness, and do a self-reflection and kind of determine where you fall. Are you asleep? Do you feel like that you're groggy? Do you feel like your eyes are wide open, just based on the titles? Do you feel like you're woke as heck, or do you feel like you're an insomniac? So let's just take a self-assessment and determine where you are, where you fall in this category. Do we want them to record that for themselves?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I really want to put out there that there's no wrong answer, right? We're all lifelong learners in this process. And if you are asleep, that's totally fine. We're here to all learn and to be and to take part. Everybody's equity journey is different. So there's no reason for us to be ashamed or be anything about where we are.
Right. And it's through that recognition of where we are that we can make plans toward moving further along the continuum. And so part of that is that awareness, heightening it. So I'll give folks a minute to kind of contemplate what each of those stages or phases looks like to them, and then also to complete a self-assessment in terms of where they feel they fall. Just give folks one more minute.
Sorry, folks. I got all excited.
Ah. And remember, this is based on your own self-definition of each of the categories. We will kind of go in a little deeper a little later on and really kind of flesh out what each of these stages represents. But like I said, just off the top of your head, where you feel like you lie on this continuum. All right. Rosanna, do you want to take us into the personal introductions?
Yep. Oh, there's somebody else coming in.
I got it.
All right, so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to break you up into smaller breakout rooms. Hopefully you get to meet somebody that you don't know in this group. We're going to discuss the following: name, position, racial, ethnic identity as you identify, and then share with your partner where you fall on the wokeness scale. What does wokeness mean to you? Right, we're really going to go into the definition and the different phases and the scale. But right now, we just really want to hear your interpretation of this. Again, no right or wrong. We just want to hear where you're coming from. And then the hardest thing for me when engaging in equity conversation is the fear of what? Okay, and so this is that self-recognition piece. So we want you to recognize, starting with our protocol, to figure out where you are in this. Recognize what comes up for you when we ask you about wokeness, when we ask you about engaging in conversations about equity, what really comes up for you in all of these things. Right, and I'm going to stop share really quick. I am going to drop this into the chat.
Do you want me to do it?
I can do it. So I have it. And then I'm going to break you up into breakout rooms. And it looks like we will have 2 people per room, which is nice. Oh, that would mean Dr. Brown, you want to go with them or you want to stay out?
I'd like to be able to pop in.
Perfect. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to open the rooms. Questions, the prompts are in the chat box. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? All right, so I'm going to open it up. Go ahead and step on into the room, answer the questions, and then we'll take about 10-ish minutes. And on our way out, we're going to reflect to talk about what we learned and how we can start this conversation with others. So I'm going to open up all the rooms. Go ahead and click on your breakout room to join that group. Perfect. Let me pause.
We had in our group, we had a great conversation. I was with Jeannie and with Dawn, and we spent a bit of time talking about, the last question about where we have the greatest fear. Okay, and it was for all of us, it was saying or doing something in this work that then disrupts the relationship and stops puts a barrier up in our ability to, and I think Don said this well, we can't change minds, but we can help people change their hearts. And, and if you're doing that and then suddenly the relationship is disrupted, there's, you can't stay in doing that, and acknowledging the fact is we all, have, we all three came from positions of white privilege in this conversation. We have a very strategic position in this work.
Yeah.
And so that, again, there's just making sure that we don't, this is my word, right? You don't screw this up. This is important, and so how do you keep these people in a relationship and conversation?
I love that. Thank you, Bob. And I don't think you're alone in that. I mean, as a person of color, I still worry about that as well, because you don't know how somebody's going to respond or react to what you say. So I don't think that you're alone in that fear. Anyone else?
I'll share. I think what I was with Lori and Valentina, and we talked a little bit about kind of our concerns, was most concerning when you're in an equity conversation, and talking about like with Lori, how she's been doing, equity work for quite a while, and that sometimes people of color, she kind of has to be in that interrupt, like that level of the protocol, because sometimes people of color want to discount what she has to say as a Caucasian woman. And so trying to, that's the hardest part for her. And then I shared about, sometimes just not wanting to be the angry Black woman. And I really liked, what Valentina said when we were talking and having some discussion about that, is she said, as long as people aren't getting, nobody's calling each other names, and you're not getting into a physical altercation, of course, where somebody can get hurt, she's like, it's okay for people to feel how they feel. People can feel angry, and that means that it's important to them. It's important to them. Just like, if somebody gets angry back, it's important to them. And let's talk about it. If you never talk about it, we'll never get anywhere. And so I liked when Valentina, said that. It's just, if it's, we're not calling each other names, we're not getting physical, but if somebody's angry, that is okay. They can feel angry, and let's talk about this. This means it means a lot to you. And so I liked when Valentina, shared that. So it was nice working with the ladies.
That's excellent. And that is actually a really great way of looking at it. If you're angry, you are passionate about it. But we tend to, the minute we feel uncomfortable, we tend to stop conversation. And I think that's where we need to continue to push through, because on the other side of that discomfort is really where all of our learning happens, once we get that far. Anyone else?
I totally relate to that. I was with Carrie, and I found myself talking about how hard it is when I'm uncomfortable, when I get uncomfortable with what's going on, how I tend to lose my words. Yeah. And that's like what I'm really working on, because it's like I don't have to have the answer to what the problem is. All I have to do really is say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with the way this is going. And then we can unpack it together. And so, and Carrie had something a little different. Carrie, you want to talk? Do you want to talk? Or?
Sure. Yeah, I had to unmute myself. So my fear is profound, and it's because I work in a district. We have a contingent of parents who are really fighting against our anti-racism efforts, and they are they feel that we are teaching, that white people are bad and reverse racism. And my fear is that I do not know how to deal with these people, and it causes me so much frustration and angst, and I just don't know. Like, I don't know how people do this.
Yeah.
Like, they just don't get it, and I don't understand how they cannot get it, and they think that, like, we want to do equity work, so that means that we're supposed to just hire a person of color with no qualifications, and they don't understand how it works. And the black and brown kids perform worse because they come from a horrible family. They don't understand systemic racism, and my fear is, how do I don't know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you maintain composure with people like that?
Well, you're not alone in that. I can tell you that. I think every single one of us works with someone like that or people like that. And at Epic, we work with a lot of different groups and a lot of different districts and agencies where they have people who are very vocal that they do not want this type of curriculum, that it's Marxist or whatever it is. And so we see that a lot. And we do encourage, so anytime we coach or consult with anyone, we do encourage them to use the protocol. We teach compassionate dialogue, which we'll go into in a few minutes. But yeah, it's a continued conversation, because when people haven't, if parents or students or certain groups haven't actually had any issue with it, their perspective is that there isn't an issue with it. And so it's hard for us to say, well, this is my perspective. It has to be people really listening to other people to gain that insight. And people, if they don't feel like it's broken and you fix it, and it might not, it might break for them in their world. So I think that there's a lot of fear on that side of what will happen to them if we provide equal access to everyone.
I'd agree with that. And I also would say too, leaning into the protocol, like Rosina said, a lot of that is coming from fear of the unknown, fear of what like-minded people are saying about what this work really means, as opposed to having the opportunity to actually see what the work is. So for example, Rosina and I work with several school districts that are doing community forums, and we're doing these community forums so that we can be transparent in the work that we are bringing forth on behalf of EPIC, in order to show folks this is what it is. It's about creating communities of belonging, and regardless of who your child is, creating these communities of belonging are beneficial for all folks within the community. And so it's not about taking something away from your child, it's about providing more for all children. And so creating those opportunities to be transparent with your community members really kind of alleviates some of that fear, and then naming it as fear and giving them the language or the protocol in order to start to unpack that fear is helpful as well.
And then Nicole put in the chat, there's a bill in Texas legislature right now to censure social studies teachers in schools from teaching critical race theory. It's crazy hard time. I agree. I just saw that today, and I think that it's absolutely insane, but this is where it is. And the reality of it is the people that are putting these bills into place, and the people that are actually, stroking this fear, they want to do just that. That is, what they want. They want this to, because the reality of it is the history that we work on and teach right now tends to be white history, and it doesn't make everyone look good. And so this is what, we want the history of all these other marginalized groups to come up, but then the realization that doesn't make white folks look good. But it happened, and it was historical, and we have to teach it, and we have to move on from it. But the people who strike this fear are doing that very, very deliberately, right? And the people who are against this are very deliberate. They're not even listening to both sides. They're just picking the side that meets their agenda and then pushing that forward. And so we do have a lot of work ahead of us, because this is something that so many districts are up against, right? I've even heard from some of the districts I work with, and they'll say things like, well, the only reason that now it's an issue, now race is an issue, is because we keep talking about it. If we stop talking about it, it won't be an issue. And I was like, when I heard that, I was like, what? And that was, somebody said that out loud, and it was, and they firmly believe that. And who am I to say? This is your perspective. I can't tell you that it's wrong, and that's what you grew up with. But this is your perspective. And so my perspective is obviously very different than yours. And it's that conversation piece. But that frustration, Carrie, is so real. So real, especially when you hear it and you're like, really, I just want equity for my students, because that's all we want. And it's like, really, you don't want that, but they package it differently. So stick with us, and hopefully this community can give you support in how to address it, or just provide even the way you engage with it, self-care for you, because the reality of it is, we're not sure how many minds we can change, but it's our job to continue to fight the good fight.
Thank you.
Of course. And then Bob said, it's like the way folks said that talking about teen suicides causes teen suicides. That's exactly it, right? We don't talk about sex ed or pregnancy, because then it'll happen. Our kids will want to do it, right? And it becomes taboo, and race has always been a taboo topic. And the more we talk about it, the more we engage with it, the less it will be. And that's where we need to go with this. And that's why we're all here to do this work. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Dr. Brown?
Yeah. So just based on our conversation, or the conversations that were had in the breakout room, just really wanting to hone in on wokeness. And there's many different definitions, depending on whether you're going to Webster or you're going to Urban Dictionary, my daughter's favorite dictionary in the world. She's always like, Mom, just look it up on Urban Dictionary. In terms of wokeness, wokeness refers to a mindset where individuals perceive themselves as being aware of issues concerning social and racial justice. And so recognizing what wokeness is, and then starting to look at aspects of wokeness, right? So we had that wokeness scale. So we're going to review that again, keeping in mind the definition of wokeness, and I'll have Rosina drop that into the chat as well, the definition. So when we're looking at this wokeness scale, we have asleep, we have groggy, we have eyes wide open, woke as heck, and then insomniac. And so really trying to hone in on the characteristics that lend themselves to each of those levels. I want us to be able to really kind of look at the scale with some of the words that are associated, or some of the ideas or ideologies that are associated with each level of the wokeness scale. And then take an opportunity to reassess ourselves based on a more fuller definition of not only what wokeness is, but what each of these levels of wokeness are defined as. So I'm gonna go ahead and have Rosina move to the next slide. So I'm gonna give folks a couple minutes to kind of read some of the, like I said, some of the fleshed out ideas that support each of those levels. And then what I'd like folks to be able to do is, now that you have a more defined definition of the wokeness scale, see where you feel you actually belong on the wokeness scale, and then think about where you initially placed yourself on this wokeness scale and see if they match. So I'll give folks a couple minutes to be able to look at the different levels, and then do a reassessment of where they fall.
And please feel free to either snap a picture or to take a screenshot of this. We will send this to you once the webinar is over for you to use in the next breakout group. This might be beneficial for you guys to have, for y'all to have.
So once you've been able to look at, like I said, some of the definitions of asleep, groggy, eyes wide open, woke as heck, and insomniac, and reassessed yourself based on the more fleshed out definition of each level, and determined where you fall on the scale. What I'd like to do is, and I think, and I didn't talk to Rosina about this, I'm springing this on her. Are there any other, and you're more than welcome to come off of mute, as you're reading each of the levels, are there any other descriptors that you would use to describe any of the levels that or have not been included, but you feel demonstrate that level within the wokeness scale? Give folks a minute to be able to kind of talk about that.
I attended a training, I don't know if it's Courageous Conversations or Paul Gorski. It might have been Paul Gorski. And one of the participants, instead of saying colorblind, they call it color evasive.
Okay.
Because I think that when they were trying to have a conversation at work, that people were getting upset about, someone saying that they were colorblind and that they just didn't understand, didn't see racism and didn't see color and all of that. And so they called it color evasive. And I thought that was a different term that I think sometimes that it seemed to kind of help the person understand. Like, it's just, when you're being evasive about it, that this is what happens. And so I like that term.
Nicole, so I'm just going to push you a little bit. So do you feel that the term should replace colorblind, or do you feel like it's actually a term that can be used as well as colorblind because it has two distinct?
Yeah.
I think me could be used, that you could still have colorblind and you could still have color evasive. Because I think that in the way the person used it, the other participant was saying that whenever they would try to have these conversations at work, colorblind was not going anywhere. And that the person was more open when they used color evasive, and how it was more detrimental to what they were trying to do in their particular job, or what they were trying to do as far as, wanting to teach the staff and work on more cultural competency and things at their job. And that the color evasive seemed to open up the conversation more than saying colorblind. Like, the person just kind of shut down, like, I'm not saying that I don't see color. Don't say, it just seemed, they seemed to be more upset with that term. But the person was saying that the color evasive, that it seemed where they could connect why it's problematic.
Thank
So
you.
I wouldn't replace it. I would use, me personally, I like using both words, both terms.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I asked you because I wanted both terms, and I was just hoping that you would have that explanation as to why, because I do believe that they're two distinct things, and that we tend to use them differently. So I really wanted, but I just wanted to hear what you had to say. My mind would have been set on however you persuaded me. So
well, that's what she kind of persuaded everybody in the training. We were like, oh, well, yeah. And she just said it just seemed that they could actually have more of a conversation when she used color evasive versus colorblind. And she was like, I don't know, why, but it seemed it opened up a crack of a door, and then we could actually have more conversations. So it's like, okay.
Thank you for that.
anyone else?
I'm kind of looking in this continuum here, and maybe it's just implied, and I want it to be more concrete. But somewhere along the continuum is the what is one's ability to self-reflect? What's one's ability to sort of stand and watch yourself, because I think that clearly, from my perspective, to move from left to right on this continuum is to be able to be just more aware of how I'm showing up, more aware of what I'm bringing to the conversation. And I said earlier that I kind of feel like sometimes I move up and down the continuum depending upon the causes and conditions and the situations and things like that. But I think that that's a, you know, you know, and maybe it's just all implied, right? Because if you know, but I think that there's a degree of self-awareness or self-observation or that increases as you go left to right.
Mm.
I actually think that you're very right on that. I don't know if that it is implied. I didn't consider that as I was looking through this, because I consider that as part of process when I learn something new anyway. But I think it's a really good way of putting it forward for people who are maybe new to the work to say that a lot of this does require that self-reflection, because you do have to do a lot of that as you're learning to grow and as you're learning to move into the different bubbles.
Mhm.
I'm down to adding that.
I love that. And this idea that depending on, like Bob said, the cause or the issue, that you could be in one place for one and someplace else for another, and that it's rather than a linear, it's more of a loop where you can wrap back around. I love that. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I showed up late. I apologize. I was in a meeting that wouldn't end. So I didn't take the pretest.
No problem.
However, I think this is super interesting, and this work is really new for me, but this presentation is timely because it's just been on my mind a lot. And I can see that there are aspects of where I'm at that fall in 3 different circles,
Mhm.
you know, and I've got some things in the eyes wide open, a couple I know in the middle, and then you know, a couple in the insomniac category, not enough. But I also have to say it's kind of funny and uncomfortable being like, you know, a blonde woman. I don't want to assume I understand more than I do, because then that just seems really arrogant and ignorant too. So I think sometimes I lean towards downplaying because I don't want to be like, oh, I'm so enlightened, because that's kind of a jerk. You know what I mean? It's a weird place to be.
I agree with you. I don't think, and again, I don't think that you're alone in this. I think a lot of us go through this on a regular basis, and it changes with who we talk to and who we engage with. And so I agree with you there. I think I do it. I know I do it. I can't speak for anybody else in the room, but I can kind of bet that we all do this. And we all have that fear of being like, well, I know, and then somebody calling us out on it, or somebody being like, well, how do you know? Or what makes you the you know, person who knows everything. So you're not alone in that, Jenny. I agree with you.
Mhm. Thank you. And I also think too that we as trainers, we admit all the time we don't know it all, and we do equity work. We're consultants, but I am constantly learning and constantly growing. And so this idea of the scale, your knowledge can shift, and as time goes by and language changes, right, that can impact your knowledge base, and as more knowledgeable you become, the more you're able to see those gaps in knowledge as well. And so just being aware that, you know, as we say in the beginning, that we're all lifelong learners, and so we are learning as we're moving through these spaces as well. And so welcome to the space.
Mm.
All right. Where did that? You there?
Yep, you want to introduce it or say something about it before we start?
All right, so we're going to show you a little bit of my, and I will just say, my favorite president. And so just because I adore him, and just how he speaks and what he says is just always just makes sense to me. So we want you to take the first part of our protocol. So we want you to recognize what comes up for you as you hear him speak. So recognize some emotions that come up or some thoughts for you that come up. It's very brief, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of him speaking to hear what he has to say about this concept of woke.
You know, this idea of purity, and you're never
Can you hear?
compromised, and you're always politically woke and all that stuff. You should get over that quickly. The world is messy. there are ambiguities. People who do really good stuff have flaws. People who you are fighting may love their kids and, you know, share certain things with you. And I think that one danger I see among young people, particularly on college campuses, Malia and I talk about this. Yara goes to school with my daughter. But I do get a sense sometimes now among certain young people, and this is accelerated by social media, there is this sense sometimes of the way of me making change is to be as judgmental as possible about other people. And that's enough. Like if I tweet or hashtag about how you didn't do something right or used the wrong verb, or then I can sit back and feel pretty good about myself because, man, you see how woke I was? I called you out. I'm gonna get on TV, watch my show, watch Grownish. You know, that's not activism. That's not bringing about change. You know, if all you're doing is casting stones, you know, you're probably not going to get that far. That's easy to do.
All right. So let's recognize what you what that video brought up for you. What are some of the things that you heard? Look at his face again.
You know, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but you know, I will say, you know, he's my favorite president too, and I've had quite a few more than you, Rosina. So I'm
just a few, I'm sure.
But the what I really enjoyed. So we're talking about the physical reaction I had in there, just warmth. I really feel a lot of warmth around this because he addressed, for me, just in general, one of our problems around the discourse that must happen around, you know, not just, you know, not just racism, but the discourse that needs to happen around sexism, and the discourse that has to happen around classism, and the discourse that has to happen around, you know, gender equity, and all, you know, all of these things. And I was, you know, I miss him.
Right? I'm also really quick, as we go through, I'm going to put resources into the chat. There's another great YouTube video that you can watch later, but it's a young woman who kind of breaks this down about wokeness, and we want that understanding of what it really means. And I think we see a lot of people, as President Obama said, who feel like once they call somebody out, that they're like, oh, my job is done here, where that's really not that of wokeness, right? And so as we talk about this and as we go into our next section, we're going to talk about things like surface versus groundbreaking. So like surface is being like, oh, you didn't do this, or I called you out. But what's groundbreaking? How do you really make change? How do you make change as a woke person? And so we want to make sure that we focus on these things. So I'm going to let Dr. Brown go ahead and take it on.
All right, thank you. And I think for me, and I watched this video, then I watched the video that Rosina has dropped into the chat. And so really this webinar kind of came about in terms, and I'm going to be completely honest, doing this equity work, some of the things that we were seeing as more and more people were focused on doing equity work, right? And so this idea of weaponization of wokeness, I don't think there's anything wrong with being woke as long as you realize that equity is not a destination, it's a journey. And so you may continue to see the horizon, but knowing that you're never really going to get there because it's a journey that never ends. the never-ending journey. And so, but this idea of weaponizing of wokeness or adapting it as a weapon really kind of shuts down the conversation, and instead of pulling people in, it pushes people out of the work. And so although we want folks to move along this continuum, just being aware of how we are showing up in a space may prevent folks from continuing to do the work, because the way in which I love that, the way in which we are operating within that our sphere of influence, right? So when we're talking about how does that manifest, the weaponization of wokeness, oftentimes it comes out as us co-opting that equity work or the equity process for our own means or our own way of doing equity work. And so anything that falls on the outside of that what we view equity work to be gets shoved aside or pushed into the margins. And so really, if that is what we are doing by weaponizing wokeness, we are just furthering the oppression or manifestation of oppression that we are seeing within society as a whole, but only doing it under the guise or the name of equity, right? And so any type of marginalization or continued oppression, even if it's done in the name of equity, is not equitable, right? Sometimes we see this as power hoarding and silencing of the BIPOC voice or other voices within the space, right? And what happens is that limits dialogue, and it also limits the number of voices that have a seat at the table, and therefore the number of perspectives that we're willing to hear from, because we have deemed the way in which they are viewing the world as being wrong and a deficit, as opposed to an asset that where they can be brought in to create an environment that is more inclusive, because their voice is present, and therefore there's an opportunity to see the gaps in the work that we're doing, right? A lot of times with weaponization, there's a shaming aspect that happens. And then when a person is called upon or called out instead of brought in or brought in closer to us, what happens is there's an aspect of fragility, and sometimes it manifests in deflecting or becoming defensive or dismissive, right? And so really, it's about how do we open up the conversation for folks and engage in a larger conversation, even if that conversation creates that discomfort in us. How do we manage those emotions? And then how do we also manage those relationships and stay in relationship with each other so we can hear each other, right? Because when it does not happen, then the environment or the organizational climate and culture lacks a feeling of belongingness or inclusivity, right? And then it also limits the diversity of thought, because if I know that you're not going, if I fear you shaming me or canceling me or pushing me into the margins, then that limits my voice, and then therefore it limits the diversity of thought that's present within in the space. Would you like to speak a little bit about or all of these aspects?
No, I think you did a great job. I will like to say I'm going to add into the chat 2 articles, and one of them is on the weaponization of whiteness, and the other one is dismantling racism. And so these are just resources for you to look at once this is over, just to encourage to continue your learning. But yeah, no, I think you did a great job with this. But for the next part, we are going to, so if you would like to also take a screenshot or a picture of this as well, we are going to break into our next breakout room where we will ask a couple of questions about this.
I believe you'll get a PDF of the presentation if you registered for it. So yes, I saw that in the chat. But just for discussion as we move into the breakout rooms, just in case you need those definitions. Thank you.
And so in our breakout room, we're going to give you a little bit more time with each other. We're going to talk a little bit about this. So have you witnessed, perpetuated, or experienced the weaponization of wokeness or its manifestation? And explain how that came about or what it looked like for you. What are some of the impacts of weaponization of wokeness? How does this negatively impact the BIPOC community? How does it impede white folks' engagement in equity work? Okay. And how has social media impacted how people engage with one another when discussing race and equity? And then how can we move from surface level support to groundbreaking support as we move along the work, move along our wokeness scale? All right, and as I mentioned before, I'm going to stop share. I'm going to drop this into the chat as well.
I went ahead and dropped it.
Huh?
I went ahead and dropped it for you.
Look at you. And so we just want to give you the opportunity. We're going to break you out again into, I'm going to recreate some of these rooms. I'm actually going to have 3 of you in each room, 2 to 3 of you. And take the time to discuss any of these questions, anything else that came up for you as you're going through this. So please feel free to engage with each other, or if you have any questions, this is the time to talk to each other. This is that group that's going to support you in your learning. And so ask those questions and then bring them back. We're going to do a brief reflection on our way out. So I'm going to open up your rooms. Go ahead and step into them.
And then I was trying to get back, so I'm so sorry.
No problem.
I hope that we have the chance to continue that. I would like to hear your take on it.
I love it. So how was our group conversation? What were some of the things that came up for you guys, for y'all? I need to stop saying you guys. People tell me this all the time, and I practice this, and my brain is like, y'all.
Y'all.
What's up with y'all?
It's nice. I like y'all. It's.
I think you'd say whatever you like.
I like y'all.
I like y'all too. Well, somebody actually in a training said, when you say you guys, it makes me feel like you're not responding to the women in the room. And so I take that. I'm okay with that. I didn't have personalized it. I understand where they're coming from. So I'm trying to be more inclusive in my language.
I didn't realize I should have been offended by it, but I'm glad you fixed it up.
Now I have to practice. It's something, it's not muscle memory.
Yeah.
To y'all, you guys all the time. And so it's y'all is practice. So
yeah.
But yeah, so what happened in the little groups?
So Carrie and Nicole and I were talking, and we really focused on, because Nicole had shared about the legislation that's progressing in Texas about how censuring schools and teachers who teach critical race theory. And, our conversation was around just that term is so, people react so much to that term, much like they react to the term woke, and, can we, how do we, and we were just saying we wish we could. We didn't get around to how could we yet, but we wish we could eliminate those terms that cause reactions. And can we get down to really what it is? And one of the things Nicole said that I really appreciated is, all we want to do is learn how to not make the same mistakes over and over again. And can we look at our history in a way? Can we look at, our day to day in a way where we can just, there's that old story about the person walks out their house and falls into a hole and then gets out of the hole and goes to work and does that for 3 days in a row before they start to think about walking around the hole. And can we, it's told much better. People tell that story, they tell much better.
Yeah. I'd never heard of it, so I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, but the anyway, so that was where our conversation hung out for a while. Is just how can we get past buzzwords and get past trigger words, words intended to trigger. I mean, they're shared with the intention to trigger fear, intended to trigger othering, to get down to really have the conversations that we need to have.
I love that. And Bob, what it makes me think about, and I'm not going to say she's right or wrong, but she is my daughter and I love her. And so we were having this conversation. And so I did my dissertation on microaggressions. I would say well before it became something that necessarily was people were having larger society was having a conversation about. I was doing research on it. And now it's become that thing where when you say microaggressions, for some folks, it has become triggering, right? And there are some people who want to deny that there are such things as microaggressions. And so I was having this conversation with my daughter, and she said, have you ever thought that, and she uses this word, Rosina, I can't believe this. She goes, have you ever thought that it's a detour for people who don't want to have a conversation about that to begin with? So now that they're using that as a leverage point to keep you from engaging in the conversation, just like with race. And I'm like, 21 years old, what? I never even thought about that.
Harder than we were at 21.
And so how is it like, and she goes, isn't that what politicizing is? When you politicize a word, then people are too afraid to talk about it because they're afraid of offending people. So then therefore the conversation ends and you never get to a solution. I was like, gosh darn it. But those are her thoughts. Carrie, right? Sorry. Bob, what do you think?
Oh, I was going to say real quickly, to me, that's similar to the flare up when people started to get in the conversation about, is America a racist country?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, well, we can argue about that for days and days and days, and we will accomplish nothing.
Right.
You know, because the conversation, you know, is deeper. But you know, Kamala Harris gets called out for not, you know, responding a certain way, and you know, and you know, and all these kinds of things. It's like, whoa, that's not the issue. That's a straw man. You know, the issue is, you know, is much more complex and probably frightening. You know, like your daughter was saying, way easier to talk about that. You know, be way up here.
Thank you so much.
What about being kind of sneaky about it? Like, we're getting deep into microaggressions as it is tied to implicit bias, and what happens and manifests in the classroom as microaggressions, and how that heaps student self-perception over years and years. And I was just thinking, if I'm sneaky a little bit by saying it's about saying stupid stuff and just avoiding saying stupid stuff to your students, and then self-reflecting a little bit about, is this related to their visual presentation and how I perceive that, and what's coming out of my mouth? Like, where's your edit button? Because that's, to me, the interruption piece, right? Is take a second, edit. Now let's engage with the student, rather than letting the thing come out and piling that onto the student. And so for a bit, maybe as a exercise, I'll avoid saying microaggression, even though everybody knows that, because we have that in our school already. We already know, everybody knows what that is meant to talk about. Anyway, so I was just kind of having a there with the detour comment.
Yeah.
Can avoid the detour.
Yes, exactly. Carrie, talk to me about that.
Well, I put it in the chat.
Yeah.
They're not microaggressions, they're aggressions. Mm-hmm. If they happen to any other group of people, they would be called aggressions.
Yes.
And it's really frustrating that we we try to make them okay, and we temper the comments by calling them microaggressions. But in reality, if someone had said that to Bob Raines, it would not be a microaggression.
So it's minimized because they're marginalized. And
yes, thank you. That's what I meant.
I love it. I'm really taking that in, and I appreciate you speaking to that.
Well, you know, that's an interesting point, because the first time I heard the term microaggression, a woman of small stature from India shared with me a microaggression that I had done, where she was lifting something, and I said, can I, you got that, or something like that. She said, oh yeah, I got it. I said, are you sure? And she put it down and she said, I said I got it. And when you ask me if I'm sure, that means you don't think I can do it because I'm a woman, because I'm small. What is it? It was a great conversation that we had, because she helped me open my eyes about it, right? I know, wow, I was trying to be, apparently I wasn't, but, but I think, Carrie, you got a point there, because if that happens between a couple white guys, the other white guy's going to go, what do you mean? You think I'm, have you called out my manhood? Have you called, or something like that? That's very, I hadn't thought about that.
I love that. Really quick, I want to say I just dropped into the protocol. I dropped into the chat our RIR protocol because as we go through the next step, which is how do we have these conversations? And for EPIC, we use this protocol, but we also use what we call compassionate dialogue. And compassionate dialogue is basically us listening with empathy and connecting with the other person in more of a humanistic form. And so compassionate dialogue, when we use the protocol, so recognizing how we feel about this and then interrupting in a manner that builds trust, but also in a manner that opens the conversation. So you have an interrupt that can open it and say, hey, can you tell me why you said this? Or you can have an interruption which shuts it down, like, how could you say that to me? Right? And so we really want the opening up conversation. And so when you use compassionate dialogue, it builds that trust, safety, and belonging, right? It provides opportunity to engage and fail. So like the story Bob said, that when that conversation happened to you about the woman in the box, the reality of it is that she could have just easily been like, yes, I got it, leave me alone. But she stopped to actually have a conversation with you, which is hugely important because you were able to engage with her, right? And you didn't take offense. You actually listened and realized that you hadn't considered her thought or her perspective. And this is what compassionate dialogue does, right? We want to ensure we may not know something about that perspective. So let's listen to it and let's engage with each other. Okay, let's build that empathy and understanding so that we can actually have a joint conversation and that somebody will want to talk to us again. Right? That's the main part of compassionate dialogue and using this protocol so that we can have these conversations again. Because we don't want the one and done. If you have a one and done conversation, nothing comes out of that. Right? There's no opportunity for growth. There's no opportunity for return. There's no opportunity for a relationship. And most importantly for us, and Carrie, I'm going to focus a little bit on you just because you have the challenging people who, well, all of us do, but you mentioned the challenging people who don't want, some parents who don't want to talk about racism and systemic issues. We still use compassionate dialogue, right? And we use it because it does a couple of things for us. It keeps us grounded and it manages our expectation of other people. The reality of it is, are we going to change people's minds in the world? Most likely not. Our job is not that. Our job is to plant a seed of thought, right? We may not even get to watch that grow, but we're going to do it to say, here's my perspective. Here's my thought. Here's my idea. Let's share them. That person might leave and never talk to you again, or that person might think about it as they walk away from you, right? And so it's mostly, and when you look at compassion dialogue individually, it's for us, right? We know our why. Carrie, your why is you want to advocate for the students, the marginalized groups. You're here because you want to do this job, right? You came into this because your students need you, the staff needs you. And so that's your why and you know it, right? And so using compassionate dialogue provides you that, I know exactly why I'm doing this. Whether I'm going to be able to make you understand this or not, you can't control other people's reaction. You can only control your own, right? But it allows you that space for communication and self-regulation. And so what I really want to point out, and as we talk about compassionate dialogue, is something we don't think about a lot, but it's a form of self-care. A lot of us, we get equity work makes us really angry and really upset and really frustrated. Okay, as a person of color, I can tell you I'm exhausted. Okay, racial fatigue is real. A lot of us we're beat down, tired, right? I'm at the point where it's Ramadan. Today's our last day of Ramadan. Tomorrow's Eid for us. It's very exciting I'm Muslim, but all I'm hearing is hate on Muslim people, and it's tiring, right? We don't get to celebrate it. There's bombings all over the place. It's a very, very difficult time. But I still use compassionate dialogue when I talk to somebody who makes comments about Muslims being terrorists or Muslims doing this, because I need to do it for me, right? I need to recognize that my anger is not good for me. My anger is not going to help this conversation. I need to do it because I deserve that. So I really go into conversations. My assumption is that everybody is ignorant, not malicious, just ignorant, or they have some sort of fear that they don't understand. And so my job is just to talk them through that, to actively listen, to help give them my perspective. Whether they take it or not, I have no control over that. But what I can do is I can engage with them compassionately. Okay, I'm going to put my empathy in there and I'm going to connect as much as I possibly can. And that helps us as we try to venture through these difficult conversations. If you look at the protocol, there's also sentence starters in there for you to start using. So if you're not sure even how to start these conversations, try a sentence starter to say, hey, you made this comment. Can you tell me why you said it? That's it. And it allows the other person to just engage and to let their thoughts out. And then you just listen. Dr. Brown? Did you lose us?
Off on mute. I'm so sorry. My internet is really interesting today. So I just kind of want to leave you with this quote. And so as we're kind of leaving the space, being mindful of each other and the journey that we have dedicated ourselves to being on. And so the quote is, don't get so tolerant that you tolerate intolerance. And so how do we use compassionate dialogue and the RIR protocol to continue doing this work and to engage in that self-care that is so important, but also recognizing when we are ourselves being intolerant and using that compassionate dialogue and the protocol to continue to open up the conversation as an antidote to the weaponization of wokeness. And so with that, I'm gonna have folks drop into the chat, take an opportunity to share out. And you can choose any of these, one thing that you are thinking, one thing that you are feeling, or one thing that you will do as you're leaving this virtual space and moving into your larger spheres of influence. And Rosina, I'm gonna give her an opportunity, but I do want to say thank you so much. She has dropped quite a few little tidbits of wisdom into the chat. So please feel free to, I think they can do it on their size, download the chat as well. So that you have access to those resources. And like I said, if you registered for it, you should get a PDF of this presentation emailed out to you. And we really appreciate hearing your voice in this space. You want to talk about the global equity community?
Yeah. And I think a lot of you are already part of our global equity community. If you're not, please join us here. I call it Facebook without the Facebook, so you don't get the cats and the, but you also don't get the anger that Facebook brings along. So you do have the ability to connect with like-minded people who are actually doing the same type of work you are. Please join this community. You get a lot of people who are in the same position who are trying to do different things. So it's a really great resource for you to have, no matter what position you're in. We have teachers, directors, superintendents, assistant soups, parents, everything. And as you get this information, please pass it along. So if you have people that want to join our community that maybe didn't take a part in this session, please invite them to the community. Please pass along this presentation. Share as much as you can so that you can actually continue this conversation. So the goal of our equity journey is for us to keep on this journey and not just to attend webinars and to stop talking about it. So thank you all. You guys are amazing. Y'all are amazing. See, that's right. And I really appreciate being a part of this.
And take a minute to read what folks are saying in the chat. I will practice compassionate dialogue. I needed to hear this today, and the information is incredibly helpful to me. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I'm thinking about increasing my capacity on the wokeness scale. I'm feeling encouraged and want to incorporate the compassionate dialogue in my equity work at my education service center. Awesome, thank you. I'm feeling thankful for all of you for having the courage to share your thoughts and hopeful for all the work that we are doing, definitely. One thing that I will do is raise this information with our leadership team here in SUSD, especially the learnings around compassionate dialogue, compassionate conversations. Thank you so much. I will use empathy when interacting with people whose hearts I hope to change. If I don't demonstrate kindness myself, when frustrated, why would anyone want to follow my lead? Beautiful thoughts. One thing I'm thinking is that there is a balance between giving space in the form of time and urgency to doing equity work. I'm looking at the many, many resources we have and being strategic as well as passionate. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, Carrie. Tomorrow is Eid, so if you have any Muslim students or their families, please wish them an Eid Mubarak. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I'm working on trying to get it a holiday in our district.
Oh, that would be so awesome.
I know.
Yeah, it's tough. It's always like, I mean, we work, Epic is a beautiful company, but it's actually not a holiday for us. It's a holiday I take, but it's definitely something that we definitely need to promote. New York has it as a holiday, which is very exciting.
Mm.
Yeah.
It is something for us to consider. But, you know, even the little things, I remember when I was in elementary school, obviously it wasn't even that big of a deal then, but I had teachers who wished me, and that meant the world to me. And so for me, it was really that. My favorite teacher used to always ask me what my family did for Eve, and I loved her for that because she was one of the few people that ever checked in with me. So check in with your students. They love to talk about this day, but nobody really asks us about it. So
Okay. Thank you.
thank you.
Rosina, would you say the wish again? Eid Mubarak.
Eid Mubarak. Yep. It
Eid
basically
Mubarak.
translates to Happy Eid, but Eid Mubarak.
Okay.
Yep.
Eid Mubarak.
Eid Mubarak.
Thank you.
Said it beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you for the
Thank you,
conversation.
everyone.
Thank you for joining us.